Welcome to the latest in our series of TopMedTalks 2. In these podcasts, the TopMedTalk team is in conversation with global thought leaders in perioperative care. TopMedTalk.
Thank you, folks. What a wonderful reception. So I'm Monty Mython, Editor-in-Chief of TopMedTalk. Delighted to be hosting this evening, anchoring this evening. We've been enjoying today evidence-based perioperative medicine, a perioperative practicum, here live from Dallas in the United States of America. Now, we're in this wonderful, I think it's a ballroom, really, with this proscenium arch behind us in Dallas in a beautiful Art Deco building. We've been enjoying some fantastic music, recommended to us by Dr. Brian Woods, who spoke to us earlier on today. And everyone's out here having a pretty good time, I think. You enjoying yourselves, folks? Now, we're just taking a few minutes of your time to record one of our pieces, which is titled In Conversation With. And that's when we choose somebody, typically a sort of bit of a legend in our specialty, my speciality being anesthesia and critical care. And tonight, we're lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Rick Dutton. Rick, please come and join us. Take your chair. Where do you feel comfortable, Rick? We'll take this one over here. So, Rick, first I want to ask you, because not everyone here will know you, we'll all know your name, a little bit about Rick the man, if you sit down. Okay, very rapid summary. Where were you born? Where were you brought up? How did the school go? Blah-de-blah.
Got it. Born in Montreal, grew up mostly in New England on a horse farm, moved a lot of horse manure in my formative years, qualifying me for a role in academic anesthesia. Did most of my school and training in Boston. Finished my anesthesia residency there in 1991. Went to work for the U.S. Navy, doing my payback, but I was in the Navy for 3.5 years. Then spent 17 years as eventually a professor of anesthesia in Baltimore at the University of Maryland. I was the chief of anesthesia at the Shock Trauma Center there, and for most of that time also the quality officer for the trauma center, as well as a number of other bits and pieces.
Now, before you go on from that bit, I'm going to pause you there for 1 second. Because I think the first time I met you and heard your name, it was the fact that you're working at this place called the Shock Trauma Center.
Yes, the world-famous Intergalactic Shock Trauma Center, right, Baltimore, Maryland.
Which is a Brit, just sounds like a fantastic name. It's like we had a place called Bedlam, I think, which is like the lunatic asylum. And I work at somewhere called the Heart Hospital, like it's the Shock Trauma Center. Is the one. So was that a tough old place?
Yeah, so this is the busiest trauma center in the United States. It's one of the first trauma centers, if not the first trauma center in the world, built from the ground up to be one building devoted to this single disease. And we took care of something on the order of 8,000 severely injured patients a year. Baltimore is a good place to do that, by the way.
and it's that I spent a little bit of time working in the USA, and before I came over, this is 20-odd years ago, although I'd reasonably mature at that stage in medicine, working in critical care, I'd only seen 3 people who'd been shot. And one was accidentally with a crossbow, and the other one was a hunting accident with a shotgun. I'd never actually seen anyone deliberately shot before, but it seemed to be every day of the week, even in sleepy old North Carolina. How much of your work was...
Yeah, so...
We're not going to go too far into this one, by the way.
Yeah,
folks,
so shock trauma, penetrating trauma, mostly gunshot wounds, was about 18% of our business the year I left. I had all the data, so I was in charge of that. And 18% doesn't sound like much. That was 1,000 gunshot patients a year. Right. So 3 would be an average day.
Right. Wow. And a lot of it, the rest of it at that stage was motor vehicle accidents?
Yeah, mostly, and falls and all the other usual sources of trauma.
So that's a hectic old life.
Mm-hmm.
You're busy.
Mm-hmm.
You're tired doing that sort of work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the next time I met you, I think you'd had to rethought things a little bit, perhaps. I don't know. But you got into quality in a big way.
Yeah, I'd been in quality all along. I'd been doing that in Maryland, but it was more of a administrative sideline than a full-time profession. I actually started in that in the Navy. Day one, out of residency, walked into Bethesda Naval Hospital. They said, "Welcome aboard, Dr. Dutton. There's your office. There's the OR. You're the department quality officer. Boss expects a report once a month."
And what were you reporting at that stage?
Well,
Everyone turned up to
I was somewhat stunned by that, but I just enough wit to say, can I see last month's report?
Oh, good idea.
And so that's where I started from, and then eventually got some training both through the Navy and then as
And what did that report look like then?
That was a 2 or 3 page summary of what was going on in the anesthesia department. So some of it is just simple demographics. How many cases did we do? What kinds of patients? And some of it was listing of complications.
Any outcomes in all of that?
Short term.
Right.
And more word of mouth than systematic. That was pre-EHRs. There was no...
So severe pain, throwing up too much? Never breathed
little
again.
bit of that.
Okay.
But it would have to be noticeable to get there.
So we don't jump forward then. The next time I remember a presentation from you, there are lots of scientific presentations in between, successful academic. You were starting to run this new institute for the ASA.
Yeah.
And I saw you give a presentation, and we'll come back to what happened next in a moment, but I thought I was so excited. You were showing outcomes of multiple centers around the United States of America. There was this new Institute of Quality, and I thought, this is the country that put a man on the moon. This is how it's all going to happen. The world is going to be completely different in about 2 years' time. Yeah.
Getting there.
What was that all about?
Yeah, so in 2009, I was sort of ready for the next thing, and it turned out the next thing was the Anesthesia Quality Institute. ASA, our professional society here, had decided it was time to create a registry, get into that business, and it's a long story, but I wound up as the first director of that. And very interesting opportunity. I had a blank piece of paper and a big check, and I was a .com entrepreneur. Go get them. And that project got off the ground quickly, and it's still rolling very nicely. There are 500 or 600 anesthesia groups in the United States now that send their data there. The quality of the data is simple.
Yep.
There are many Michigan folks here tonight, and one of my constant discussions with the Michigan folks is our data is, as they describe it, a mile wide and an inch deep.
Okay.
And that's largely true because it's what we can collect readily right now.
So, reflecting on the time you spent there, proudest moments?
At the Quality Institute, getting the whole registry off the ground is huge, and it continues to run. Getting it embedded in the national reporting apparatus, so as Medicare developed their schemes for pay for performance and so on, we were right in the middle of that discussion, and in fact we were able to drive a lot of that. And then one that doesn't get as much attention, a second project there was the anesthesia incident reporting system. So a legally protected, safe place to go talk about adverse events in anesthesia. And that's still running to the day. Every month in the ASA Monitor, that goes to all the anesthesiologists in the U.S. is a case report from that, adverse event, human factors discussion. This is what we can do to prevent this from happening again. And I launched that. I wrote the first 50 of those. I'm still on the committee that runs them. And I think we probably saved a bunch of lives doing that.
So now we talked before we got up on stage about areas you don't want to go. Okay, and you gave me a few of them, but you didn't mention this one. Is what would be your biggest disappointment doing that job?
The ASA it's a professional association, it represents everybody, so it has a very public focus. It is somewhat political. I think most of us would agree to that, and that I wasn't always on board with the political message. And the frustrating part about that job turned out to be I could see everything that was going on in the United States, but I could do nothing. And we got some things like, I mentioned the case reports on airs probably help, but I couldn't really get my hands on the levers to actually improve patient care, improve anesthesia quality.
So where are the levers?
The levers are much more local, as you all know. So one of the things we teach, one of the things we did at ASA is we started an annual quality course. It's a weekend-long training for anesthesia quality people. And one of the lessons of that course is that problems are universal, but solutions are local.
Right.
And That's very true. So in 2015, I got to make the most informed job decision in the history of anesthesia. I had data on my desk from 500 anesthesia practices across the country. I had visited many of them. I'd seen the landscape. And I chose to go to work as Chief Quality Officer for U.S. Anesthesia Partners, which is now the largest private practice in the country.
So before we get into that one, which is the next time I met you, from the point of view of those levers, I said I worked a little bit in the USA, but spent most of my life in the National Health Service, where we have a few levers. It's only relatively recently I understood how much of the healthcare system in the USA is paid for out of taxation. If you want to call it your National Health Service, is bigger than our National Health Service.
Correct. And the proportion's actually very similar. It's about half the healthcare in the U.S. is paid for by the government. Same as England.
So I think it's called CMS, isn't it? Medicare, Medicaid. Why don't they flex their muscle? Why don't they pull those levers? It just seems as though
they do, and they have been, and Medicare probably doesn't get enough credit for what they have been able to accomplish. But that said, it's a giant bureaucracy. It's hugely inefficient, and they're 100 miles removed from the problem, right? So they can put measures on the table. They can demand that we collect data and report on those measures, and they do. But most of us are very cynical about what we're being asked to report. Most of us are very cynical about the measure development process. No specialty society would ever put a measure on the table that makes their specialty look bad, for example. So what you end up with are a whole lot of measures that are mostly about public accountability, right? Showing the public that we don't kill too many people doing anesthesia, all right?
That we're kind of okay.
And that's good data to have. We want to say that anesthesia is very safe. We want that message out there, but it's terrible for quality improvement,
is the ambition there okay? We're okay?
No, the
ambition excellence?
No, Medicare truly does have the ambition to get better over time, and they have been. And we tend to overlook some of the successes they have. For instance, they put a measure on the table for hospitals about readmissions a few years back, and they put some teeth in it. They pulled a lever and said, we're not going to pay you, for readmitted patients, and we are going to penalize all of your Medicare pay if your readmission rate is too high.
Okay.
So that's an example of them pulling a lever.
That's a big lever.
Yeah. And the rate dropped, I don't know, it's probably up to 80% from before that measure to today in terms of readmissions. Now, I'm a cynic. Half of the drop was recoding and reclassifying and dodging around it, but some of it's real and some of it's legitimate, and somewhere in there is some real quality improvement.
So let's jump forward to the new job, which is where you are now, which is in which group again? It's US?
U.S. Anesthesia Partners, USAP.
And the move to that position, I say, in building up to bringing the meeting here, myself and Sol met you for lunch. And I met you in the UK a little bit beforehand. You gave a lecture and were given an award by the Royal College of Anaesthetists for the great work that you've done. And when I was making my notes building up for this, I described you as like a kid in a candy shop.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it looks like you had data or data, whatever you want to call it. You had people to work with it, and you had levers. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, this is great.
You're the new Wizard of Oz, is that right?
Yeah, I have the best job in America, honestly. I love it. And,
So tell us why it's so good.
Okay, so I get
but
to...
You said you wouldn't disclose your salary, so you won't ask.
No, I'm not going there. I get to, especially because a bunch of my partners and CRNAs are here in the audience.
It's not that impressive.
Yeah, no. No, I am much closer to the levers now.
Right.
So I can do things that actually affect the quality of care. And this is really cool. USAP, we're big. We have resources.
How big's big in this?
Big is 4,000 clinicians right now.
Okay.
So we're deeply in 8 states. So we're not every place across the map, but where we are deep. So here in DFW, it's about 1,100.
Right.
50-50 doctors and CRNAs. And so big, and that is the biggest practice in the country in one body. All of the data from all of these people, and it'll be about 2.5 million cases this year, is all in one common data warehouse. So all the demographics of all those patients, everything we do with them, all the who, what, why, where, when, how long it took. our slate of outcomes that we gather at the point of care, every case, every day, our patient satisfaction information, all of this in one common warehouse where I get to play with it.
And the providers, they get to see that? Do they get dashboards
Absolutely.
out to them? And
Yep.
do they go on their phone and look it up and say, we're here in the league table and this is my score, my handicap, whatever it is?
Yes, so every provider in USAP can go with the same app that we capture the data in. You can press a different button and look at your current scores that day, benchmark to whatever you want to benchmark it to. Same for our patient satisfaction information. Every one of our providers can go online, look at how they stand, how their group stands, how they stand compared to the country, the whole thing. And most of them don't, by the way.
I was going to ask that. That it's there, but most people...
Yeah, they look at it once, they're okay, and they don't look at it unless there's a question where it comes up. Right. I think there's less... I think that is a less useful tool for improving quality.
Okay.
So picking up the patient satisfaction piece. So we send an anesthesia-specific satisfaction survey to every patient we touch.
Right.
We get about a 30 to 40% response rate to that. So I'm getting 500,000 return surveys a year. It's a validated national system. It's well built. And like I say, anybody can go look at it. And we get all the raw data back from that, and we stick it in our warehouse attached to everything else. Showing the patients their score, or showing the providers their scores, doesn't really help much.
Even if they're an outlier?
Correct.
So even if they're the worst?
If they're the worst, there is always a reason why. The patient's crazy, I'm doing the harder cases, all of that.
But if they're the worst for every case?
And then any of you who've tried to drive change have been through all that. What really helps, getting to something that Mike said this afternoon, is the emotion. So what I do insist on with that data is when we get a negative comment from a patient. So if they give us a low score, we ask them for a comment. We say, well, what's this about? We collect that comment, and the system, the computer, automatically sends it straight to that provider's inbox. And it says, I've gotten, Dr. Dutton, this patient gave you a low score on communication skills for the case you did last week. And here's the comment. And it's, Dr. Dutton, I was so mad at you when you came in to do my pre-op, you didn't talk to my family. Okay.
Can you give us a sense of the more common complaints? Is it more like they stuck me 3 times and I threw up? Or is it more communication and empathy?
It's much more communication and empathy. Yeah, and first of all, I should say, we are positive comments to negative comments about 100 to 1.
Okay.
All right. But the negative ones, we see those. And like I say, we send them straight back to the provider. And some of it is a crazy patient. Some of it is clearly not the provider's fault. It's parking or nurse crankcase in the PACU or getting stuck 3 times for the IV or who knows why. All right? But some of them are legit, like the one I described. You didn't talk to my family. So I was grumpy about that, and the provider's always grumpy about that feedback, but it's a very private system. It's, it's not disclosed anywhere, and people get better when they get that feedback.
Do you have 360-degree feedback and appraisal from your colleagues as well? We now have to do that as part of our revalidation in the UK. So we've got to give everyone a form and say, how big an a-hole do you think I am, or whatever the question is.
It's hard
and
to
they don't hold, it's anonymized, and they can size it well.
We do activities like that.
Yeah.
It's not mandatory, but we do solicit input from hospital administrators. We solicit input from surgeons. Hard to get surgeons to fill out surveys, by the way. At least for us.
Where's Vicky? Vicky, can you come up and join us for a second, Vicky Morton? And if anyone wants to ask Rick, I was calling you Rick from the beginning. I've only ever known you as that.
Rick's good.
If anyone would like to ask a question,
Well done.
we can sue. And I think there's a question towards the back of the room in a second. There's a question down here in a second. We'll come to you in 1 second, sir. I'm just going to get Vicky to make a few... Have you got your microphone with you, Vicky?
I do.
There we go. Because you're a bit of a data queen, if that's an appropriate term, a champion of data in your work. Would you like to work with Rick? This is not a recruitment pitch. Tell us where you work at the moment and what you're doing.
At the moment, I work in Charlotte, North Carolina for an anesthesia group. They employ me. They are contracted with the hospital system but they've employed me to oversee the enhanced recovery program within the hospital system. So I kind of oversee and work with hospital administration and the multidisciplinary team within 6 hospitals, and now we have 10, almost 11 service lines. But yes, so I used to do all of the data, but then they allowed me to hire somebody to help, and she has been helping me. But data is massively time-consuming.
But is it worth it?
It is so worth it. You have to collect your data. It is a soapbox of mine. The hospital system historically has not been collecting the ERAS data, but now they've come on board and they're building dashboards, but we will still collect our own data.
And because we titled this, which I think is a Deming comment, I might be wrong, is it "In God We Trust, All Else Bring Data"?
Yes.
Yes.
Or data?
I at least cite him when I put that one up there.
Would you like to have the system, would it help if you had the system that Rick's talking about?
Yep.
How can I get on that?
Yeah. So we deliver the data lots of different ways. So you went right to, do we give it to the providers? Absolutely.
Do you give it to the patients? Do you give it to the payers?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, now
We do. I'm actually working on a set of payer reports right now. But
can you use that to leverage contracts? Can say? Well,
yes. Brian showed one of the slides I actually used this afternoon, which is the one with the different insurance companies and their push toward value-based care. We do that. We actually get paid more in several contracts based on giving them data.
Yeah. Any questions for Rick before we open up to the floor?
Well,
you're not allowed to say, "Do you have a job?"
Always hiring, looking for talent.
Now, how do you get everybody on board with actually the data piece of it? Because I struggle with that. Some people don't really value the data piece.
USAP came together out of some very high-end practices that really got it. And remember, this was a very conscious job choice on my part. So I went where the soil was fertile to do this. And most of them already had some sort of mechanism for gathering data from cases. Because hospital systems are this way and their EHRs are this way and we're this way, we really have to do it ourselves. I'd love to be able to pull data out of the hospital's EHR in a big way, but that's 900 different problems for me right now, and we're picking at them one at a time, but it's going to take a long time.
How do you identify your ERAS patients in the database? So if you're reporting this to payers, right, and they come to you and say, we'd love, because this happened to us, we'd love to impact your reimbursements, but how do we actually isolate the patients that you're impacting, and how do we measure that as an insurance company?
Mostly that discussion, for us at least, has been at the local level. So I'm probably supporting, we have, 4 or 5 dozen ERAS programs across the country. Different sites, different service lines, and slightly different flavors in every different place, right? That's the local solution again. So my job is moving around the best practices. So we have a huge library of templates. You can go find everybody else's program. There's a committee that looks at those periodically and sort of curates that collection of documents. But anybody who wants to start a program can just go and pick up, here's an order set, here's the pathway, here's the things that we put in it, here are some references, all of that. Then locally, the first thing I say to them is, if you're going to start this, get some data right now. You'll all be much happier if you do this. And mostly they do, and then when the project rolls, you can get more and better data. The secret sauce, and I'm sure many of you in the room already know this, in my opinion, about really making an ERAS protocol go, is persuading the hospital to give that bunch of surgeons a nurse practitioner to own them and love them. And that NP who owns and loves that service does the education for the PACU nurses and the pre-op nurses and so on, and collects the data. So much like a trauma coordinator in my former life. They own the data. Yeah, go ahead.
So we actually, we have one service line in our hospital, but they have navigators. So the bariatric team, they have navigators. They don't collect the data, but they do everything else and make sure everything else is done. And I had a meeting most recently with the VP of Surgical Services, and I said, how do we get navigators in every one of our service lines? And she agreed. She's like, we need that. And I said, because that is a well-oiled machine, and we need to be able to have the collaboration and those people watching over everything. Hopefully in our system that will happen. It's just, it's not.
I find that's the best way to do it. And then you can get very local data very specifically. I have a wonderful graphic from the colorectal program here showing compliance with the bundle as captured by the NP who owns the bundle versus length of stay. And it's enormously persuasive.
So we're coming up to the last few minutes of this section. We're then going to take a quick break. We are going to come back to follow up and get many more voices from the floor. So in a few minutes' time, we're going to take a quick break. We'll get your comment now, sir. Then we'll take a break for about 15 minutes, reload our glasses. Those of you at home, do whatever you need to do. And then we're going to open up to the broader audience to make comments and ask questions, etc. Sir, before we break.
I just wanted to...
Who are you, sir? Sorry.
Sabri Ayad from Cleveland Clinic. With the amount of data that you have you thought about the introduction of blockchain technology?
Sorry, say that again?
Have you discussed, with your team, if you want to introduce the blockchain technology to help you streamline the process of the data that you have?
Oh, blockchain. I've only briefly run that by my IT director just to see what he would do with it. He flinched, and I left it. But I've actually been working with the ABMS, the American Board of Medical Specialties, about whether physician credentials should be moved to a blockchain system in the United States. And we've started to spec that out. I just wrote a white paper on this topic, actually, for inside ABMS.
Thank you. Sol, I think you had a quick comment, and then we're going to take a break.
I guess there we go. So Rick, information is the derivative of data, and best practice is the derivative of information. How do you integrate innovation in that continuum?
Well, one advantage of having, the scope that we have is I have 2,000 physician partners around the country who are out there innovating every day. And I get to referee or moderate discussions on our sort of internal listserv every day about, does anybody have a cutoff for BMI in their surgery center? Last week's discussion was about hemoglobin A1C. What threshold should we use for what kinds of patients? And invariably, when you ask one of these questions, you get a lot of different answers across the country. And what that often demonstrates is what's possible. And then once everybody else knows what's possible, you can move the whole business along. And particularly around ambulatory surgery, what is okay to do outside the hospital has been changing about every 3 minutes for the last 10 years. And I get to watch that. So that's sort of cool.
So the red lights are flashing at me, which means that we got a break for 15 minutes. So do please enjoy what you need to do in that 15 minutes, recharge your glasses, etc. We'll be back, so save those questions. We'll be back for another quick burst. And we're going to get you to do a lot more of the talking. So Rick Dutton, thank you very much indeed.
Nick Majerison here. Thank you for listening to Top Med Talk. Now, make sure you've subscribed to Top Med Talk on your podcatcher or however it is that you're listening to us at the moment. And you're spoilt for choice. We're on pretty much every single podcast platform you could think of. So make sure you've subscribed. Make sure you've engaged with us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. And make sure you've signed up for our email updates on topmedtalk.com. If you get yourself there, you'll find a website that contains all of the podcasts that we've ever done, and it gives you the chance to sign up for our email updates. That way we can always get in touch with you and tell you what we're up to. Oh, and while you're online, check out ebpom.org/meetings. While you're there, get excited about EBPOM London 2019, the London Perioperative Medicine Congress. It's on July the 2nd, and it's one of many meetings that EBPOM organises around the world in order to communicate the perioperative medicine message. Have a look, ebpom.org/meetings.